Well, greetings. It's Dr. Dean Blevins, and I wanted to provide for you a really, I hope, somewhat short supplemental video to kind of build upon the class introduction and some of the guidelines I've provided so far. And this presentation is more of a conceptual introduction to the process of how we're going to be engaging online, and particularly the use of this language, digital cafe and maker spaces. For those of you who've been active in online education before and have spent a little time in the middle side already, you might be wondering, why in the world am I using this language of digital cafe instead of just talking about forums? Or why am I talking about makerspace as opposed to just saying you have a project due at the end of the semester? And I freely admit I could probably use that language, but one thing I have noted just out of my own pedagogy is some of the limits of the learning management systems in the way, and Moodle is our learning management system, in a way that it can kind of reduce a class experience to kind of compulsory and perfunctory, read and post, turn in your book review, turn in your major project. And you're going, is that all that a learning management system can offer? And what I am trying to do is conceptually, if you will, rename the process that opens up the possibilities of the imagination as we engage each other online. And so I'm very deliberative in why I'm using this language, and hopefully this presentation will explain that a little bit more. So when I'm talking about a digital cafe, and oh, by the way, if you ever type that and you can't get the accent over the E, don't worry about it. That happens to me a lot as well. But this whole concept is really built upon a pedagogical principle that's known as World Cafe. And there are several links. There's one on the slide, but if you just Google World Cafe, you will find that this is a sort of a principle of how do you encourage educational engagement through what we might call rotating small groups. And so if you have a larger class, how do you get people to sort of engage with each other in such a way that they're really more intimate and they're really focused more on hospitality and creativity and collaboration rather than merely just listening to the information that's being presented. And there are some underlying principles. I'll talk about those as we go along. But I think that's really one of the most important things is that this whole idea of the World Cafe, it has kind of captured, at least for me, the imagination of what might be possible within an online environment. But how do you do that in a forum? I mean, particularly the way forums are constructed. Well, one, actually, and I'll just name this as your posture as you enter into those forums and how you engage the information. That becomes part of what's really important. But then the forum flow does make a difference. And so if you'll give me just a second, I'm going to point out something. Some of you already know if you've had classes with me, but since so many of you are new, this may come as a surprise. And I'm joining it actually from a different class. But you'll note when you log into a forum inside Digital Cafe, the first thing you're going to see is, well, the assignment information. I've already pointed that out. And then you will also see this line, reply to this post, don't start a new thread. You're going, why? Well, the reason, and this is a good example, is as you post, you'll see that people's replies sort of appear underneath the initial post. And all of the information, all the interaction is on one page. And yes, it tends to kind of look like threaded discussions. As a matter of fact, and I didn't rehearse this, so let's see if I can do this quickly. And if I can't, I'm not going to worry about it. Let's see. Ours will be set up for standard form for general use, but I think I'll leave that alone for now. As a matter of fact, I'll close this. But if you were to look at those forums and just look at the topical approach to that, you'll see that it looks like a thread that extends outward. And I do that very particularly so that as you enter into the class, into these digital cafes, you'll post your initial introduction. And that will then invite other people as they enter into the class, sort of your initial concept or idea. They may post their initial concept or idea directly underneath you, as opposed to starting a new thread. Or if there's a somewhat different, feel free to start a new thread. And basically what you're doing is sort of creating tables, if you will, in how you sort of build these sort of small group interactions. Yes, you're only supposed to reply to 2 or 3 people during the week, but you might already begin to think about how this begins to give more of a sense of a deeper sense of kind of the possibility of intimacy. Now, inside Digital Cafe, one thing they require is once you start in the small group, normally, if we were doing this real time in real space, about 15, 20 minutes in, they would invite one person from each table to stand up, move to a new table, bring the insights they've had, and engage those with the next new group. I'm not asking you to do that. That the forums will probably would get massive from that standpoint, but it does allow you to have an opportunity every time you log into that forum inside Digital Cafe to scroll visually across all the information and begin to listen into the other small groups, the other engagement that each person is doing. And yes, if there are new posts, there's normally a colorized bar. So you can, if you've read the same, not read, but even engaged briefly the same post 2 or 3 times through the scroll function, you can kind of skip over it and look for the colorized bar that tells you this is new information. But the real intent there is to really have you kind of casually engage everyone's conversation and flows so you kind of get a sense of the whole. It's also important with the second half of the summarization of the week's insights, where at the end of the week, you have an opportunity to quite literally have all of the information that everyone is engaged in, and you can begin to pick up what's important from that standpoint. So one way to think about it, and this is through the principles of World Cafe, when it comes to saying the context, we'll let the reading do that. And I'll be upfront with you. That's something that the reading will do that kind of helps us know what the theme is for that week. Then I'm hoping the kind of flow of the forums create a bit of a hospitable space. You can kind of find places to interact with each other. And as I've said, even use interaction includes video and audio as well as text. And I'll let you sort of work through the experimentation of that as time goes along. There'll be opportunity to explore really the questions that matter from your perspective. That's why I'm telling you, pick the things that attract your attention, raise critical questions, concern you, and bring that inside the Digital Cafe to that, particularly that first forum that you do. But then it encourages everyone's contributions. Other people then can offer insights. And truthfully, particularly in the second half of the semester, when we are only reading one chapter that sets the context, we'll be bringing multiple points of reading, both in our books, supplemental readings, but also probably through articles or other information we're encountering. And we can bring all that. Feel free to bring that into the conversation. Just let people know where it's coming from. Then I'm really trusting it does, through this engagement, help us connect to diverse perspectives. We each come with our own particular interests and concerns, but we learn to listen together for insights as we're involved in these forums. Then probably those insights then help us sort of in our summary forum so that we share the collective discoveries in those summary forums that we think are important from that engagement. And so I really hope you hear that, yes, it is a forum. You can't ignore the learning management system influence, but I'm really hoping that our modes of presentation and kind of our postures of engagement, sort of the World Cafe etiquette that's there, including the have fun, big button, really becomes a part of this. Now, for some of you, particularly since this is theology and ministry, so we're very serious about what we're doing, is this also a place for critical space? Can we question the author's assumptions? Can we raise concerns about the adoption of technology? Can we take a more what we traditionally associate in graduate theology classes, more of a critical perspective to the work? I would say yes, you can, but with one caveat, and that really is this idea of hospitality, trusting that the process of the mutual engagement really becomes important inside these digital cafes, and that the insights that emerge toward the end of each week really do actually contribute a broad range of insights. And hopefully then we can address your critical concerns, but also begin to think more constructively and creatively as well around this information over time. By the way, again, you can read about the principles of World Cafe, and I hope you will do so, if only to think about, well, how might these forums actually more reflect the vision of the World Cafe, albeit within digital form. So that gives you a sense of kind of why there's a lot of lack of specificity in some of the guidelines and what you're supposed to do in the forums. But I'm really trusting that the arrangement of the process actually encourages us to interact with each other in maybe in ways that normally we might not think about in an online environment. Well, if Digital Cafe is one approach to what this class does over this semester, obviously Makerspaces is the other one. Truthfully, that language is borrowed from innovation and engineering. So, yep, it's a kind of tech-oriented theme. And you will find, I allude to this in a general introduction, but you'll find that Makerspaces really even occur these days in new libraries. There's a lot of emphasis on including a makerspace as a part of a public library, where you get kind of a hands-on learning using basic tools or instruments or new devices. Everything from sewing machines to 3D printers and a lot of other forms of technology anchored into this. It really describes a place where inventors also gather to display new creations. Now, you might not like that language theologically, so one other way to say it is to display expressions of creations that are really adaptations of other expressions that have predated them. So there's no creatio ex nihilo at work here, but there is yet creativity in the way in which adaptation has been done. And normally in makerspaces, people are doing these creations for beneficial purposes. If you try this in a junior high classroom, that might be an open question, and I know that. But usually these spaces are really used to create things that will benefit the person who's putting it together. Many times the person's putting it together, and probably done to benefit, well, other people as well, if not the fullness of God's creation in any given moment. I wouldn't be that hubristic. I'll be upfront with you. Makerspaces in some ways are the extension of science fairs, if you've ever participated in them. So STEM technology, science, technology, engineering, math, really influences the way makerspaces are built. But there is a lot of craftsmanship that's always there as well. So the basic crafts, if you think about that we do from sewing to music, those crafts also tend to show up in these makerspaces. As a matter of fact, when you get into presentations, makerspace presentations, which prior to COVID were beginning to circulate around the country, you would find that this was a place where artistry and engineering sort of meet together through, and this is language borrowed from one of the websites, through exploration, tinkering, play, and collaboration. And so these are kind of open spaces that really are designed to not just demonstrate technological mastery, but look for artistry in the midst of that technology. And yes, to allow for exploration and fun to occur as a part of what's going on. Now, honestly, can you do that online? Well, we're going to find out. At least the way it's designed here. And you're like, well, it just seems like an independent topic area with a discussion area and a few extra resources there. Well, I'm hoping we can turn those kind of blank spaces right now into true maker spaces as we go. So one thing I'll just be upfront with you is that we have to develop some conceptual tools, the same way that maker spaces have a lot of things sometimes hanging from the ceiling that are tools that we pull down and then utilize, or things in bins that we pull out. Well, we're going to do that, and that's why the glossary exercise is a part of this class. I really want each student to think about how we're building that glossary is to be providing conceptual tools. And when you think about the fact that each student is going to contribute 22 terms, albeit spread out and probably not evenly across the three areas of study, um, that provides the fact that we moved beyond, say, 10 students, which at one point I was envisioning maybe what was here, that will provide a deep array of different kinds of concepts and ideas that we can pull into our conversations, both in Digital Cafe that we've already talked about, but particularly here when we're starting to work on projects. And the discussion forum inside each one of these maker spaces is the kind of common working area that I hope kind of encourages this to use these comments on this diagram is to kind of encourage creativity and exploration and play, where you're bringing in real world design, you're bringing in the project you want to work on, particularly with your context and what you think is important, that will invoke collaboration, that actually will tap into multiple learning styles, because depending on the kind of project that you want to do, doesn't have to be merely a linear paper, but can be quite diverse. And even some of the examples I give show that possibility. That it does encourage, well, not only high engagement, it gives you a place to do that if you choose to, but maybe even undiscovered passions around some of these themes. And yes, it does inspire, I think, makerspaces inspire cross-curricular connections, so that things that we're doing in one part of the class actually begin to incorporate in. And so instead of just reading and writing on forums and turning in a book review and doing your own paper on the side, at some point, you're actually looking for people to help you, and you're discovering ideas, maybe even sometimes conceptual ideas in one of the other areas, because they're going to be available to us all, that you can import into your project inside this makerspace. Let me do say that it is important to recognize that you have to complete at least 7 of those conceptual tools before you can access the common working area and the discussion forum. And the reason for that is at least you have a language even as you enter into this conversation. So Digital Cafe, not as big an issue here, is that at least you have some buy-in, some engagement with the topic as you enter into the discussions. And so there'll be a little bit of pressure starting mid-semester to make sure that happens. And you'll get a badge, a contributor badge that also gives you access into this space. But then it becomes really a place for engagement that'll probably, I wouldn't worry about the first half of the semester that much, but hopefully it'll be a robust place for engagement in the second half of the semester as your reading goes down, but the workload goes up more in, well, the work on the projects that you think are important. What's really important to me, this is something that's a principle that sometimes in online education doesn't appear, is that collaboration is a part of what needs to be going on. So yeah, you'll be the developer of a personal project that can be quite varied, but I am really encouraging everybody to at least contribute to one other person's project. And I mean, contribute in a way that helps, that really makes a difference in how it helps that person. Albeit that contribution may vary depending on how the project itself is designed. But at some point, I'm a firm believer that online education invokes collaboration. I could do that by forcing us into small groups to work on pre-designed projects. But I really thought this makerspace would give us a way in which our individual passion can find connection with at least one other person in the course, maybe a couple, in the way in which we contribute to what they're working on. And the transparency of that project becomes something that, at least for all of us, we can share some of our own investment into those. That to me really works a whole lot different than an assigned small group that has to work on assignments from the professor. So it's a little scary, but I hope that you capture the kind of vision of what I'm hoping to see happen inside these makerspace moments. So let me just remind you, when it comes to the Digital Cafe and Makerspace, we're not going to do it all at once. We'll be spending some time inside Digital Cafe, well, starting this week and moving forward, and we'll hopefully get a rhythm there before we move into the Makerspace, both in selecting the terms that come out of the supplemental reading that you've selected, or other places. Though I would say, if you're going to use terminology that doesn't come out of the supplemental, sort of the canon of the supplemental readings I've given you, that you at least draw from things that come from academic studies. So you may find an article in EBSCO that captures your attention, but look for something that's not just popular press, but something that's a little more focused, maybe even out of some of the supplemental websites I've given you that are more academic in nature, that you then offer as a conceptuality as one of those makerspace tools inside the glossaries that you're doing. And then I hope one thing I will say is that we really are testing the limits of Moodle. One of the things I'm saying to you is you get badges, and some preliminary badges were created, but they didn't quite fit the goal. So we're recreating those. So you may not see those badges right away, but at least when you come out of here, you'll have a way of saying, I actually went to a graduate theological seminary class and got a badge as a part of that engagement. I do really want to say that I hope you recognize that we will be, well, serious at times. I may seem to be almost too playful right now, but the topics we will be reading, the material we'll be engaging is quite serious. And particularly as we move through the criticisms, it may seem quite daunting from that standpoint. And there'll be 2 weeks where we really will attend to that carefully through the flow of the course. But I am really wanting you to be a little bit playful. I hope that you'll be able to see this as a place where it's not about mastery of content as much as is participation within these ideas and concepts, finding your own sort of voice and space as we go along. So what does that mean? Well, some general tips, even as we begin this class. I know some of you are going, I'm still wrapping my mind around technology, period. But I would say that one thing I'd encourage you to be thinking about, you don't have to own it right away, is kind of begin with the end in mind. So this makerspace project is sort of, and it will be a part of the sort of end of the program. But go ahead and begin to think about, well, how might we engage technology for the sake of ministry? And particularly, what does that look like in your context? Would it be a particular type of presentation? Would it be a paper? Would it be a curriculum? I mean, begin to think about what you might want to do toward the end of the semester. Don't have to own it, but something that you might think about. And then I want you to think about, as you get to know your classmates, particularly, how might we work together toward that? I mentioned in the general introduction, my educational principle is really built around the concept called Gestalt. Which is the idea that we get a lot of ideas out there, and then form begins to take shape in the midst of those ideas. Part of that form comes in finding the intrinsic connections that we discover as we engage and read together and converse with each other. But some of the forms actually occur from our extrinsic concerns in the way in which we want to use this information to make a difference for the sake of ministry. And I hope you hear it's a both and in that. I do trust that by the end of the semester, when you get ready to write your reflection paper, that you'll have your own sort of working theology of technology, and you will have a way of moving forward. I am not here to provide that for you at the beginning, but to provide instead a process that hopefully can guide you to the end. And for all of this technology, we will trust that the Spirit of God's at work in what we do, and that as a result of that, it will be the Spirit's guiding, albeit through, at times may feel very artificial, hypertext and online engagement. We still will trust that the Spirit of God is at work, even in the midst of that, to bring about God's own redemptive purposes and plans through our hospitable engagement with each other. Well, I hope this has been a helpful orientation, and blessings to you. We will see you online.